we're solving them, we solve them by completing the square. Remember I said if you have a quadratic that can't be factored, your two options are completing the square or the quadratic formula. Okay, everybody's familiar with the quadratic formula, right? If you forgot what it is, you need to memorize it, okay? X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. The most common mistake that students will make when using the quadratic formula is they'll only put the square root over 2a. It's all over 2a. So I challenge you to not make that mistake. It's the whole thing over 2a. Okay? The next most common mistake is people will mess up their signs because they'll either A, try to put the entire thing in their calculator at one time. If you don't put the parentheses in exactly the right places in your calculator, it will not calculate it correctly. Okay? And so do not try to put the whole thing in your calculator at once unless you're amazing with your calculator skills. Okay? So the quadratic formula is simple, but you have to keep yourself neat and organized while you do it. Now, use the calculator during it, absolutely, but only calculate pieces at a time. You minimize the chance of making a mistake then. Okay, so let's look at a problem. Now, whenever we use the quadratic formula, your equation always has to be set equal to 0. This is different than when we completed the square. When you complete the square, you want it equal to your constant, right? But when we use the quadratic formula, it has to be set equal to 0 because you have to identify A, B, and C. And you can't do that unless it's in standard form. AX squared plus BX plus C. Okay? It has to be in standard form for you to pick out A, B, and C. And if you don't have it set equal to 0, you're going to pick A, B, and C have the wrong signs. Okay, so if you have to combine any like terms, you need to do that, and you need to move everything over so that it's set equal to 0. Okay. Once you have A, B, and C, we just plug it in. But just plugging it in, yes, it's simple, but you have to stay organized when you do it. When I first write the problem, I always keep my A, B, and C in parentheses so that I can keep those signs straight. Messing up the sign is the most common careless error. Okay? Okay, so first, in number 1, we have 2x squared minus 3x minus 4 equals 0. Now, when you look at this problem, think about the problems that you just worked. Okay? You have to ask yourself, would I use a quadratic formula or would I complete the square? I see that my coefficient of x squared is 2. So if I divide everything by 2, is that going to give me some fractions? Yes. So if it's going to give you some fractions, then I would suggest using the quadratic formula. If you could divide everything by 2 evenly, then I would probably go with completing the square. Okay? Now for all of these problems, we're going to use quadratic formula. But given a test, and I say find the roots or find the solutions or find the zeros or just solve, technically I don't know what method you're using. So you can find those solutions any way that you see fit. Okay? So in this case we'll use the quadratic formula. Now if you don't have the quadratic formula memorized, my most valuable suggestion would be for each one of these problems that you do for homework, write the quadratic formula first and then substitute in your values. Don't keep flipping back to your notes to find it, because when you go back and forth, you're probably going to make a mistake. And if you write it every single time, by the end of your homework, it will be cemented into your brain and you will not forget it. Okay? Repetition is the easiest way to remember things. And so we have the quadratic formula written right here. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to substitute in my values. So I have x equals, okay, negative, what's b? Negative 3. So I put b in parentheses because people are going to mess this up. Because that's not, when I simplify that, that's not negative 3. What is that? Positive 3. Because it's negative whatever b is. That means the opposite of whatever b is. Okay. So negative b plus or minus the square root of, b is negative 3, so negative 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 4, okay? All over 2 times 2, okay? So that's step 1. Substitute in all your values, okay? Now we're going to start to simplify this a little piece at a time. Like I said, if you try to throw all this in your calculator, if you don't have all these parentheses in the exact right spot, you're going to make a mistake, okay? But, so x equals, now this is positive 3 plus or minus the square root of. Negative 3 squared is 9. If you put this in your calculator, what's that going to give you? Negative 9. Because your calculator is going to square 3 and then make the answer negative. Okay? So if you put this in your calculator, put parentheses around that negative 3 so that it knows what to do. The calculator only does what you tell it to do. Okay? And so this is 9. Then you have negative 4 times 2, which is negative 8, times negative 4, which is positive 32. So plus 32. That's the next place that people will make a mistake. Because there's a minus right here, they'll automatically put a minus right there. No, what goes right here is the sign of that. And so you're multiplying negative times positive times negative, so your answer is positive. Okay, so be careful. Be careful with there too. I try to show you where people mess up so that you can try to avoid those mistakes. All over 4. Okay? And so now this is 3 plus or minus the square root of, what's 32 plus 9? 41 all over 4. Okay? 41 can't be square root of 41 cannot be simplified. And so your answer can be written like this. Or you can write it like this. 3/4 plus or minus the square root of 41 over 4. Okay? Either one of those is acceptable answers. A lot of the times when you're doing the quadratic formula, you will want to write it like this in case you can reduce any fractions. Okay? In case you can simplify further. Now, this is telling us that the 2 points where it crosses the x-axis are at 3/4 plus the square root of 41 over 4 and 3/4 minus the square root of 41 over 4. Okay? Those are the roots. Those are where that graph holds on to that x-axis. It's the roots. Okay? And I'm saying that because I want you to get used to the terminology. Roots, zeros, solutions, they all mean the same thing. Okay? Any questions? All right? So I want you to do that one. So you need to combine your like terms and set it all equal to 0 first before you can pick out A, B, and C. All right, so we need to get everything to the left. So I'm going to get rid of everything on the right. So minus 7 minus 7 minus 2x squared minus 2x squared plus 9x plus 9x. All right. So then I have x squared. 13 minus 9 is minus 4. 20 minus 7 is 13 equals 0. So we know that A equals 1, B equals negative 4, and C equals 13. Okay? So we write the formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We write that every time too. You know it like the back of your hand. Okay? So x equals negative, what's b? Negative 4. Negative 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 13. All over 2 times 1. Right? We're good? Okay. So now we simplify this. So that's positive 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. Don't automatically put a minus because you don't know if it's plus or minus yet. Negative 4 times 1 is 4. Times 13 is 52, and it's negative 52. And that's all over 2. Okay? So that's 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 52 is, very good, negative 36 all over 2. So x equals 4 plus or minus what? 6i, very good, all over 2. Now I'm going to put each one over 2. Why? So that I can simplify it, right? Because this is saying divide both of those by 2. Well, I can do that very easily. So x equals, that's 4 over 2 plus or minus 6i over 2. Now you could have skipped this actual step where you wrote it out. So x equals 2 plus or minus 3i. So that's 2 plus 3i and 2 minus 3i. Any questions? How do we do? How many got it right? Good. If you got it wrong, did you find your mistake? Okay. So y'all work this one. Okay, so I'm going to move everything to the left so that I can set it equal to 0. Okay, if you moved everything to the right and set it equal to 0, your ABC values will be the opposite of mine, but you should still end up with the same answer. Okay, and so we add 3x squared to both sides. We subtract 3x from both sides. Okay, so it equals 0, and then we have 3x squared plus x minus 2. Okay, so A is equal to 3, B is equal to 1, and C is equal to negative 2. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 2 all over 2 times 3. Okay? So that's equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1. Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12 times negative 2 is positive 24 all over 6. So that's negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 25 all over 6. Well, this one's neat and pretty, isn't it? So x equals negative 1 plus or minus 5 over 6. So that's negative 1 plus 5 over 6 and negative 1 minus 5 over 6. So x equals negative 1 plus 5 over 6 and x equals negative 1 minus 5 over 6. So x equals 4/6, which reduces to what? 2/3. So it crosses the x-axis at 2/3, and x equals negative 6 over 6, which is negative 1. Now, we want to think through some things, okay? Since I ended up with a positive number underneath this square root, That gave me how many solutions? 2. Are they real or imaginary? They're real. If I end up with a negative number underneath this square root, what kind of solutions will I end up with? Imaginary. How many? 2. How do you know? Because it's plus or minus, right? So if you think about this, if there's a negative underneath this square root, you're going to have 2 imaginary solutions because you have the positive case and the negative case. It's going to be something plus or minus something I, right? So that's definite, guaranteed 2 imaginary solutions. If it's, like we just said, if it's positive underneath here, they're 100% going to be real solutions, and there's definitely going to be 2 of them because you have the positive case and the negative case. Okay? What if there's 0? What if it ends up simplifying to 0 underneath this square root? How many solutions? 1. Is it real or imaginary? It's going to be real. How do you know? Because there's no imaginary numbers. The only way to get imaginary numbers is if you end up with a negative underneath this square root. So if it's 0 underneath this square root, we can't have imaginary numbers, and you only have 2 options, real or imaginary, so it has to be real. And why is there only 1 of them? That's true also, and what she said is true also. If it's 0, then you eliminate the plus or minus. You take away, if you add 0 to something, it's the same thing as if you subtract 0 from something. There's still only 1 answer, okay? Plus or minus doesn't change that 1 answer. So what's underneath this square root, the part of the formula that's underneath that square root is b squared minus 4ac, right? That's the part that's underneath that square root. So if you calculated b squared minus 4ac, whether it's positive, negative, or 0, can tell you whether you're going to have 1 real solution, 2 real solutions, or 2 imaginary solutions. If it's positive, you're going to have 2 real solutions. If it's negative, 2 imaginary solutions. If it's 0, 1 real solution. Now, just doing that doesn't tell you what the solutions are, but they can tell you how many solutions you're going to have and what kind they're going to be. Okay? That's called the discriminant. This piece underneath the square root, b squared minus 4ac, is called the discriminant. And the next part of your homework problem tells you you need to be careful when you're reading the directions for your homework because you don't want to do more work than necessary. Okay? If it says, find the discriminant, and then tell how many and what kind of solutions they are. It doesn't say, find the solutions. We don't care what they are. We just want you to figure out the discriminant, and then, based on whether it's positive, negative, or 0, tell me how many solutions they're going to be, and whether they're going to be real or imaginary. Okay? So, the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. And that's that little piece underneath that square root. Okay? It's just a fancy word for that. No, it's not the radical. It's not the radical. It's only b squared minus 4ac. It's just that calculation underneath the radical. Because if that calculation underneath the radical is positive, you're going to have 2 real solutions. Okay? So, this says the discriminant is used to determine the nature of the solution. Okay? It just gives you a general idea about the solutions. If it's greater than 0, then 2 real roots. If it's less than 0, then 2 imaginary roots. And if it equals 0, then there's 1 real root. Okay, so let's look at example 1. We're not going to do all of these examples because we don't have enough time. But x squared minus 6x plus 10 equals 0. The directions say, find the discriminant and tell how many and what kind of solutions they are. So, first identify A, B, and C. A is 1, B is negative 6, and C is 10. Okay? We're not doing the whole quadratic formula. We're not finding the solutions. We're just doing the discriminant. D equals B squared minus 4AC. So the discriminant equals negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 10. So the discriminant equals 36 minus 40. So the discriminant equals negative 4. So the discriminant is negative. How many solutions and what kind? Are they going to be real or imaginary? And how many? 2. So therefore, and does anybody know that this is the little symbol for therefore? 3 dots in a triangle means therefore. Therefore, 2 imaginary solutions. So for those problems, that's all you have to do. So don't go through and waste your time finding the solutions. It's not what they're asking. Okay? So pay attention to the directions. Any questions on this? Okay. One more thing you don't have to write down. We're just going to look at a graph, and I want you to tell me, looking at this graph, tell me whether the discriminant was positive, negative, or 0. So looking at this problem right here, it was 0 because it only touches the x-axis at one point, so the discriminant had to be 0. What about this one? Was it positive, negative, or 0? Negative, because that's imaginary roots. And what about this one?
Positive.
Positive, okay? So your homework, you should have already written it down, but your homework is down here. Page 295, it's not very many problems. 32, 36, 40, 42, and then 48 through 64, every other even.